Hello everyone, welcome to a brief Tactica video. The interim rules for Blood Angels have gone up, and as the epitome of hopeless fanboy, I could not hold back. I had to share opinions on it. So that's what this video is for. Before we get started, please like and or subscribe on the appropriate channels. That really helps get the message out. And you can introduce this video to more people to tell me exactly how I'm wrong about all my analysis here. So I'm going to be looking at and judging these interim rules for a couple of different ways, or using a couple of different ways: game effectiveness, lore friendliness, and some speculation at the end. So I hope you enjoy. Let's jump right in. So I want to start with some of the overall takeaways that came from my analysis of this, and we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty in just a minute here. Overall, the core features of the chapter's inherent rules, Red Thirst, and all that, those are all the same. Everybody's been saying that in the Space Marine Codex, it's all written out more or less the same way it's written out now, or written out the way it was in the 2018 Codex combined with Blood of Baal. So none of the things, so far as our hand-to-hand combat effectiveness goes, none of those things have changed. And then we also have access to things like Chapter Master, Master of Sanctity, all of those point cost based improvements to general characters, which I think is an excellent addition and something that we can really take a lot of advantage of so far as our faction is concerned. We'll talk about that a little bit more in detail when we talk about Sanguinary Priests. The negatives, we have a short-term loss of access to a lot of different stuff, and I'll explain that for you right here. The first thing I want to call attention to is this change right on the first page of the document, where it says the rules presented in the 8th edition printed 2018 version of Codex Blood Angels are no longer supported and cannot be used. So that means that anything that wasn't in the document that GW put out, including relics, psychic powers, stratagems, all of it, none of that is available for us to use right now as Blood Angel players until the new book comes out. That's huge, and it explains a little bit why they are in such a rush to get so many marine-themed books out as quickly as possible. So on that same note, where we're talking about things like stratagems, this is the list. These 4 stratagems are all of the stratagems that are unique to Blood Angels that can be used until the book comes out. And one of those, Honored by Baal, that's for successor chapters. Ouch. Like, all of our mobility stratagems are gone. That's my big takeaway here, is that we are the Jump Pack chapter, but both Wings of Fire and Descent of Angels are gone. Not to mention Forlorn Fury and all those other stratagems that benefit the Death Company, except for the one listed here that improves the Feel No Pain from 6+ to 5+. This is going to have massive short-term impacts on the effectiveness of this army in general. Now, let's not forget that we also apparently have access to the full suite of stratagems, and that the stratagems are being recategorized by the terms that are put in the regular Space Marine Codex. So it's not like we only have 4 stratagems, but all of the things that in stratagems gave us character are gone. It kind of ties back to that video I posted where, the problem with stratagems is if you tie so much of a faction's core feature to that stratagem, if it's gone, it takes away a lot of what that faction's core feature actually was. So, not saying that I've got the gift of foresight, but we'll have to see what happens when the new book comes out. So with the talk of stratagems out of the way, let's talk about relics. So all of the main rulebook relics are gone. Every last one of them. So Angel's Wing is gone, Standard Sacrifice is gone, and those 2 were basically the default choices for Sanguinary Ancients and for the typical Blood Angel Smash Captain, which tells me that I feel like the Smash Captain's definitely on the way out so far as their design. I think they're tired of seeing so many captains, and the fact that they've limited the number of captains you can take in detachments, kind of the similar to like Tau Crisis Commanders and things, what happened with there, is that's a move in a narrative direction, kind of like we talked about at the beginning, that so far as a narrative move, I think that's something that they're bringing into the game from a lore perspective. You don't have 3 captains of the same company flying around doing stuff. Now the question is, will what we do instead be as effective? So the relics that we do have are relics that came from the Blood of Baal book. It's all the relics that came from Blood of Baal, actually, including the minor ones. And out of those, now that that's kind of our pool of choosing, there are some winners and there are some that are just going to remain overlooked. But the real winners are these 3. So the first one I want to talk about is the Wrath of Baal. This is the Sanguinary Ancient banner. It's the same as was written in Blood of Baal, but with Sanguinary Ancients getting a significant buff, in my opinion. I think these guys are the best. Now, Icon of the Angel is my number 2. This is for friendly Blood Angels core units, and it's an aura ability, and you can reroll any of the dice. Now, that's something that's stayed the same, where now if you spend a command point to reroll your charge rolls, the icon lets you choose which dice you want to reroll, so that's good. Then, for my number 3 pick, Biomantic Sarcophagus, if you're going to bring a Dreadnought, or if you're going to bring a Librarian, you're going to bring a Librarian Dreadnought. It's the clear winner so far as effectiveness for points, and we'll get into that when we cover Mephiston. Finally, I'll do an honorable mention for Gleaming Pinions. It's no Angel's, wing, but the +1 to charge rolls is nice, and being able to charge after falling back is also nice. And then an extra honorable mention to Sorrow's Genesis. Well, Sorrow's Genesis is going to have some weird interactions, especially if any Fleshdares players out there upgrade their Chief Apothecaries, because I believe there's a stratagem that lets you bring a dead model back to life with full wounds. Now, the buggies have the proper keywords for that to work, so does that mean that if you have a unit of buggies that have 3 models and 2 of them die, you can use the stratagem to bring 1 back to life and then use this relic on a 2+ to bring the 3rd one back to life with 3 remaining wounds? I'm not sure that's designed to work together. I'd have to get my hands on it and really look at the wording, but that could create some feel-bads. Just imagine the power of Gabriel Seth's anger reconstituting a destroyed vehicle, especially after it explodes. So that's going to be interesting. I'm going to comfortably file that in the not as it was intended file, and we'll see how long these interactions work together. Now, so far as a narrative consistency score goes, these relics all feel fairly unique to the faction. I mean, losing the main Codex relics really mostly just upsets static builds that everyone just kind of took for granted. It's like, oh, we're always going to take the Standard of Sacrifice. We're probably always going to have a Smash Captain with the Angel's Wing. Now, we have to think about it a little bit harder. Whether that's better or worse for the faction, time will tell. Especially since, again, these are interim rules, so take any salt with a grain of salt. So the next faction-specific sort of special rule that I want to go over is Black Rage. And that has really got some improvements, in my opinion. I think it gets full marks on the narrative and gameplay points. It's got 2 positives and 2 drawbacks. So you can no longer fall back from combat with a unit that has the Black Rage. I think this is fantastic. Very thematic, very appropriate. I'm a little bit confused about why they still have awful leadership, but we can look past that. Also, the other drawback being that you can not do any actions with a unit that has that keyword. So if you have the Black Rage, you can't perform any actions that would help you score objectives. I think that this works really well with the 6+ Feel No Pain and with the +1 attack on the charge. So you have 2 positives, you have 2 drawbacks. They're narrative, they're effective, they still make you want to take the unit while still having to make some tactical choices about what you do with your other stuff. I think this is a win. I really like this. So next, let's go into some of the data sheets since we've covered the big shakeups so far as the general rules go. Let's start with Dante. Now, Dante, I'm so happy with this change, I have to say. Dante has been underwhelming ever since 8th edition started, even from his barely changing from the index days. Now he's brought up in line with how I feel most chapter masters should be, especially the named ones. So he's got your Angels of Death, Death from Above, which is pretty standard. Death Mask of Sanguinius, I love this. I wish it was a little bit more special because his is supposed to be more special. But each time an attack is made against this model, subtract 1 from that attack's hit roll. That's going to be really good for his survivability. That used to be a stratagem, and now that's built in. So this kind of takes away from my point earlier about stratagems taking away things. They're putting some things back in. I think that's the right move. He's still got his Iron Halo, 4+ invulnerable save, Lord Regent of the Imperium Nihilus. So if you have a Battleforged army, you get a command point for Dante being your warlord. Finally, he's needed that since forever. I mean, how Calgar could do it and he couldn't, I don't understand, because Calgar bent the knee to him. But oh well. He's got the Chapter Master rule, which is the same as all the Chapter Master rules. Rites of Battle, reroll hit roll 1 aura. This is going to synergize really well with Sanguinary Guard, finally. And then he has the Epic Hero of the Imperium rule, which lets him use an Epic Deed stratagem for 0 command points once per game. Now, what our own unique Epic Deed stratagems are going to look like, I don't know. But I really like his rules now. The last thing I want to bring attention to is the Axe Mortalis, which is now Strength +3, AP -3, 2 damage. Flat 2 damage. Thank goodness. He loses the ability to reroll all hit and wounds, of course, but I feel like that's a sacrifice I'm willing to take for all of the other improvements he got. So I'm giving Commander Dante an A+ for rules, a B for points efficiency, and an A for thematic score. I'm 100% on board. The next one I want to talk about is the Sanguinor. He's undergone some serious changes as well. I think that most of these are thematically appropriate. He's going to get an A+ on all that, an A+ on points efficiency, and just awesome points for unique abilities in general. So the first change I want to bring attention to is in Carmine Broadsword. It's still Strength +2, still AP -4, but it is now also straight damage 2. Thank goodness for that. But on top of that, wound rolls of 6 inflict a mortal wound. That's way better than it was before. You've got the reliable 2 damage with the option for mortal wounds. I think that this is going to work well. The next change comes in his Aura of Fervor buff. It's an aura. Makes sense. The difference being that this no longer stacks with the Shock Assault additional attack. So while it gives him some supportive staying power, he's not going to be making everybody have like 7, 8, 9 attacks anymore, depending on who he's buffing. So Shock. This is still a good buff, but on the first round of combat, you're not going to feel it. But subsequent rounds of combat, you are going to feel it. So some staying power. Angelic Visage does the same thing as Dante's Mask, so improving his survivability in combat. Iron Halo still. My favorite part, though, is the Miraculous Savior rule. Oh my gosh, this is so fun. So I'm going to paraphrase it because it's a long rule, but basically it allows him to heroically intervene into a combat from reserve. So he just shows up out of nowhere to save whoever it is got charged by the enemy in their assault phase. I think that's fantastic. It's perfectly lore appropriate. It's an incredible thing. And then his Avenging Angel rule is basically his old warlord trait, but since he wasn't always the warlord, now he'll actually get to use it. It's a longer heroic intervention range. So, and he can still attack if he fell back. So this guy, he's really going to be picking up after people's messes, and I'm really excited to see how he does. He comes in at a lean 150 points, so he's cheaper than Dante. I think they also both synergize well with each other. I really think that the Sanguinor is going to be incredibly popular if he retains these rules changes into the codex itself. So the next character I'm going to talk about is Corbilos. He went through some interesting changes. I thought he was pretty thematic to start with, but the big thing about Corbilos that's changed is the way the Red Grail works, and I actually really love this change. This is consistent across all Sanguinary priests who have chalices, but Corbilos, of course, is the best because it's the Red Grail, and if you're going to have a magic blood cup, you want Corbilos. So what this basically does is it's an aura ability that allows him to let other units in the army treat whatever phase we are in for combat doctrines as the assault doctrine. So whatever doctrine you're in, it could be first turn, could be second turn, you always treat combat as if you're in the assault doctrine. That is huge because you have additional AP for your weapons, and you have the extra attack from Savage Echoes. Now this is going to be extremely powerful, and this really helps mitigate some of the problems that Blood Angels have, where they kind of needed to waffle around until turn 3 before they could get the most out of their abilities. Now all of a sudden, Corbilo and his special cup is making everybody have a good time. The other thing, his Narthecium is now a 6+ Feel No Pain aura, which I think kind of helps mitigate some of the sad pandaness of losing the Standard of Sacrifice. We're trading a 5+ for a 6+, but now it's for units and not just models within range. I think that for foot-slogging armies, Corbilo is definitely going to be your way to go. Now this holds true also, and there's going to be a bit of a trade-off between him and the Sanguinary Priest, who can take a jump pack. It does about the same in combat, but it's more mobile. The difference being that the Blood Chalice that the Sanguinary Priest has can only nominate one unit in your command phase to receive the benefits of the Assault Doctrine. So if you're rushing forward and Corbilo can't keep up, the Sanguinary Priest is probably the way to go. But if he's supporting a walking unit, across a small table or something, I mean, Corbilos is going to really deliver on a bunch of those abilities. So it's going to be up to you, depending on how you build your army, on how you want to do this. Sanguinary Priest, I mean, he's got the Astartes Chainsword, so he's got better damage output than he did. He's got 4 attacks with that, and then Shock Assault, of course, will give an extra. So he's got 5 attacks with Shock Assault, and he's got his Narthecium, which is still an aura. It's not just nominated to one unit. And then, of course, Combat Restoratives, both of them have that. That's pretty in line with the rest of the different Apothecary rules. So I think that Sanguinary Priests are actually, because they have all these abilities, because they're pretty much always on, they can be pretty much, they'll be replacing Librarians in all Blood Angel lists in the short term. We'll see what happens with Librarians coming up. So with that, let's get it over with. This is a bad band-aid for me to rip off. Okay, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but Mephiston is definitely the most underserved of all the Blood Angels characters. His rules are pretty much unchanged. He's changed points again, I think, to 155. I can never keep track of what his points are because they change so often. He's still got a plasma pistol that will kill him if he supercharges it, which makes no sense. I don't know how Karn has a better plasma pistol than Mephiston, but hey, you win the shooting plasma game, Karn. Congratulations. I'm sure Korn will be proud. He still has his Lord of Death rule. He has his Psychic Hood. Vitaris is time 2 strength, AP -3. It's still D3 damage. So, I mean, not a whole lot has changed here. One of the things that you have to look at, though, is, again, he's missing his psychic powers. So, and we're missing some of the key stratagems like Red Rampage to really kind of spike his attacks up as high as they used to be. So he can't Quickening for the extra D3. He can't Red Rampage for an extra D3. He's just got the Space Marine stuff. And that hurts. It hurts his mobility. It hurts everything. I'm really kind of bummed that Mephiston is as bad as he is here, and that taking a Librarian Dreadnought is going to be the better option. And let me kind of show you why. So the Librarian Dreadnought went through some interesting changes, where you have Mephiston's Lord of Death rule, where he can ignore wounds on a 5+. The Duty Eternal rule for the Librarian Dreadnought just automatically reduces damage that's incoming by 1, which is obviously better. He can explode, yes, but the damage that comes out from that is just 1 mortal wound. You can give him the Biomantic Sarcophagus as a relic if you wanted to bring him. Again, I think you're still probably going to be choosing Sanguinary Priest first, but look at the number of attacks. So he's not hitting on 2s anymore, but there are ways to mitigate that. He's got 4 base attacks now instead of 3, which is good. And then check out the new rules for Furioso Force Halberd. So each time the bearer fights, it makes 1 additional attack with this weapon, and no more than 1 attack can be made with this weapon. So he's got 4 attacks with the Furioso Fist, 5 attacks with it for Shock Assault, and then an extra attack with the Furioso Force Halberd that does D3 plus 3 damage. That's between 4 to 6 damage guarantee. That's really good. And that way eclipses Mephiston's damage at point, especially since he's lost access to things like Quickening and Red Rampage and his mobility. Now, the Librarian Dreadnought has lost his mobility as well, but it's still a character. I think that if you're, especially when you look at the points, it's 150 points for a Librarian Dreadnought. 155 if you give him a Melt-A-Gun or a Heavy Flamer, which is the exact same as Mephiston. But he's got more wounds, he does more damage, he's more survivable, higher toughness, all of that. I think that it's a no-brainer at this point between Mephiston and Chief Librarian. Chief Librarian Dreadnought is basically what it's going to be. So, well. We'll see how that pans out when the book itself comes out. In the short term, Mephiston's probably not your best bet. So I'm giving this an F- on lore. I mean, in the most recent Mephiston book, he stopped time while a laser was shooting through a Thunderhawk cockpit, reknitted the whole thing molecularly, and then gave the pilots of the Eldar fighters, there were 6 of them, aneurysms that killed them as soon as he started time up again. Like, that is in no way reflected in his rules. And I'm not saying that he should be that way, but if you take a Dante Mephiston combo, it should feel like Darkness in the Blood, where you have Mephiston and he's powerful, but there are drawbacks. And it's an excellent portrayal of him. And it was one of those things that made me really excited for the character's future, but Primaris Mephiston so far is kind of a letdown. So, lore friendliness, bad score. He's got decent enough rules for a Chief Librarian, I guess, but the Libby Dreadnought is definitely the way to go. Next, let's talk about Asterath. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on him. Most of his rules are the same. He got some pretty important buffs. I think he also got a little bit of a points hike to go along with it, but that's fine. He's still got his 2+ armor save. The Executioner's Axe is now just straight damage 3. That's great. It used to be you had to roll a 6 in order to do that on the to wound roll, and I think that him going to just straight damage 3 is pretty fantastic. He's got a lot of the same sort of chaplain-y stuff that he did before with the updated data sheet from Blood of Ball. He's still letting Death Company auto pass their leadership. Now, Death Company, if you're taking multiple squads of Death Company, it just makes perfect sense to have Asterath there, because they'll never lose anybody due to combat attrition. So, the Massive Doom ability that he has changed a bit. This is kind of the last most important change, is instead of just a once per battle ability, it's an actual thing you have to roll for, and it only affects one unit instead of an aura around him. But no matter what, you're always going to get that +1 to hit. Even if you lose a model when rolling a 1 for the result, you're still getting the +1 to hit, which I think is a good move, because this way you don't have to try and cast, or well, it's not really a cast. You don't have to recite this mass and roll a die and maybe it fails, and then roll another die and then maybe it does nothing. So I think that's a good change. I think Asterath is pretty good, but I think he's only going to be seen in Death Company Army archetype builds. We'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end. Next, we'll just briefly mention Lamardi's. He's basically just been very shoehorned into, you can only support Death Company, you're only a chaplain to Death Company. He supports them really well. I think it's fantastic. However, outside of a list that has Death Company, you're never going to bring Lamardi's, and maybe that's the way it should be. So I'll give that an A+ for lore. Asterath, I'll give him a B, B+. He does pretty well, but I think they're both solid choices so far as a Death Company oriented list goes. So far as units are concerned, now that we've talked about the key changes to good Blood Angel characters, I think that it's important to talk about kind of the foundation of that archetype thing I was talking about just barely. Sanguinary Guard or Death Company. So let's start talking about the Sanguinary Guard and some of their changes here. They got some substantial buffs, in my opinion. The first thing that you should notice is, while they didn't get a 3rd wound like I was expecting them to, they got an extra attack instead. So they've got 3 base attacks, which is fantastic. Their Angelus Boltgun is the same. All of the other pistol options are the same or in line with the new Space Marine stuff. But the Encarmine Axe and the Encarmine Sword are also +1 or +2 and +1 strength respectively, and are damage 2, just flat damage 2, not D3 anymore. I think this is great. So they got extra attack, they've got better guarantees on their damage, They've got bonuses to their strength, so they'll be chewing through infantry, heavy infantry, and if they're supported by someone like, say, a Sanguinary Priest with Blood Chalice or Corbilo, then they're acting as if the Assault Doctrine is always active. So on the charge, in the Assault Doctrine, a Sanguinary Guard will have 5 attacks per model. That's fantastic, with the potential to do 2 damage each. Now, beyond that, they also have the Death Mask buff, so they're a -1 to hit for attacks coming from enemies in close combat. They also have an upgrade to their Heirs of Ascalon rule, where it's no longer redundant with Dante's reroll everything. It just adds a +1 to hit if the unit is within 6 inches of the Warlord. So you combine that with Dante, where he's got his plus a reroll 1s ability. These guys are going to be hitting on 2s in combat, rerolling 1s because of Dante. Now that synergizes, and that's really a good thing. I'm really happy about that. I think that Sanguinary Guard are in a really good place. I think that anybody who's thinking about taking them, there's still plenty of reason to take them. I think you definitely want a Sanguinary Priest to support them and hand out that 6+ Fatal Pain. You're going to want to give them a jump pack. They're going to really synergize well with a lot of what this Interim Codex looks like it's good at. We'll see how they fare with the actual end release. The Sanguinary Ancient, we'll just kind of throw in here at the end as well. It has a lot of the same rules. Some pretty substantial changes. The chapter banner also gives a +1 to hit, so even if they're not within range of the Warlord, or if your Warlord isn't, whoever, it offers an additional +1. So say your enemy has a -1 to hit, and they're within range of the banner and Dante. All of a sudden, they've got a +1 to hit from the banner, a +1 to hit from their Heirs of Ascalon rule, and they're still hitting on 2s. Fantastic. I love it. They have the -1 to hit in close combat, just like the regular Sanguinary Guard. And then the Astartes banner got reworked, so it still does the +1 to leadership, but they got rid of the reroll 1s to wound in combat, which I'm kind of sad to see go, but it does the Astartes banner rule now, where on a 4+ they get to fight again in combat, or shoot their weapon or whatever. I think that from a min-maxy good-bad, I think that the trade-off for this is actually pretty positive. And then if you can combine that with the relic we mentioned earlier, where it gives them bonuses to movement and things, especially since that's essentially going to replace all of our movement stratagems, Sanguinary Ancient is going to be a must-take, I think, even outside of Sanguinary Guard focused lists. He's just that good. So far as gameplay, I think Sanguinary Guard get an A+. I think the Sanguinary Ancient gets an A+. I think he gets an A+ for lore as well. He does the ancient thing. He does it better than everybody. The Sanguinary Guard fill that elite slot super well. I know that they're not, say, Vanguard veterans with updated storm shields that where they're effectively a 2+, 4++, la-di-da-di-da. But I don't know that Vanguard veterans are more effective in the long term so far as these guys are concerned. I think these guys are pretty solid. So now on to the big question on people's minds, Death Company. And the big debate that people are going to be having is, what's better, Death Company Marines or Death Company Intercessors? And the answer is it depends, but I think that Death Company Marines edge out their Primaris brothers for a couple of key reasons. The first thing is they're up to 2 wounds, and so are the Death Company Intercessors. So Death Company Marines can take jump packs, Death Company Intercessors can't. Death Company Marines can customize all of their weapons, Death Company Intercessors can't. They can have 1 Thunderhammer, they can have like a special pistol, they can have bolt guns and things, but one thing the Death Company Marines lost is the ability to have a chainsword and a bolt gun at the same time. You have to sacrifice your chainsword and bolt pistol for a bolt gun or a Thunderhammer, which I feel really bad for all those folks out there who modeled Death Company one-handing their bolt guns, because it's not a thing anymore. I'm really glad I never changed mine over. I've always kind of felt like that was an oversight, and maybe that's my gift of foresight coming in again, but I figured it was going to swing back this way. So the other thing that you have to think of, though, is that Primaris Death Company as intercessors benefit from all of the stuff that benefits Primaris. So that means transhuman physiology. Now that's one thing that we haven't mentioned, is that changes to transhuman physiology means that only Primaris Marines receive the benefits of it. So where a Sanguinary Guard would be super tanky normally with a transhuman physiology buff, and so would the Death Company. The Death Company intercessors are now the only ones who can really take advantage of that. So maybe that's useful. And on a small map or a small point size game, maybe not having too far to walk isn't such a big deal. But I still think in the majority of cases, regular Death Company are going to be more mobile. They're going to be being able to keep up with the Sanguinary Ancient a little bit better. I think that they'll benefit more from some of the general rules that are coming out, the new codex. I guess we'll see. But I don't have any inside knowledge for anything like that. But it just my instinct is jump packs are still better because movement wins games. Now, again, these guys aren't going to be scoring anything by performing actions, but they're deadly. So if you want to be able to use transhuman physiology, you're going to go for Death Company intercessors. In pretty much all other cases, I think you're going to want to do Death Company. And the last thing I want to point out that's changed on their data sheets is that unit sizes have shrunk from 15 to 10. So you can only have 10 Death Company Marines with jump packs. I think that they're going to synergize really well with Asterath. If you have multiple units of Death Company in squads of 10 or something like that, their points, I mean, they've got a price tag to them, but you'll get the most bang for your buck, not ever having to worry about losing Death Company to a low leadership value like they've got for leadership tests and combat attrition. So with the changes to the Black Rage and with the sort of value decisions you have to make with Death Company intercessors, I'm giving them a solid A for both gameplay and lore. I think that all of these things are working well together, and that's kind of going to lead me into this sort of final wrap up. I know there's units and things I haven't covered. The increase in range for the Flamestorm cannon on the Ball Predator, yay. Lucifer engines being built into this datasheet, yay. It's still not going to see any use, I'm afraid, outside of like Crusade. Furiosa Dreadnought, the frag cannon going up to 18-inch range, not bad. Its blast, not bad. But again, there's not a whole lot to recommend those in favor of some of the things that are going to be obviously more powerful coming up. So that's kind of my hot take on some of the changes that have happened with this interim book. I think, in terms of sheer competitive power, it's definitely a nerf. We're playing with one arm tied behind our back. I think it'll still be fun. I think we've got some interesting previews for some of the design concepts they have for units coming up. Now, what do I think? So far as speculation goes, I think that we're going to see at least one unique unit, Primaris unit, come out with this book. We may see a single character model get redone. If we do, I'm betting it's either going to be Dante or the Sanguinor. My money's on the Sanguinor because he's just a little bit more interesting to me right now. And with his sort of ethereal nature, he lends himself a little bit better to a redesign that's something a little bit bigger and more impressive. One of the things I hope to see is just a revamped Mephiston. He needs some help. Just help him out, guys. He's way more epic than he is on other paper. So help him out. That's what I'd love to see. So far as other speculation goes, I don't know if we'll see like a unique vehicle or anything like that. I wish that there would be something else. I mean, we used to have such cool, unique army lists, and I loved the old Rhino Rush list. That was something that it seemed really kind of critical to the Blood Angel playstyle. I built my third company around that idea because that was Tycho's whole thing, was having, a ton of fast-moving, dudes in rhinos zipping around the battlefield fighting orcs on Armageddon, and I fell in love with that fantasy of just a quickly redeployed vehicle-based army with fire support. I would love to have a reason to bring some of the new floating tanks, the lighter sort of Predator-looking ones that are on the Impulsor chassis. I know that people aren't really hot on them, and I really think that, so far as a meta is concerned, we're still going to see mostly infantry lists because there's going to be people who want to take advantage of the core keyword. I think that while that was a great move, they also kind of shot themselves in the foot because they needed another one that was something for vehicles. They needed a core for vehicle. I don't know if you wanted to call it mecha or whatever you'd want to call it, but there needs to be some benefit to taking vehicles that don't get the buffs that are handed out. So either the vehicles themselves need to be better, or they need to be able to get support in different ways. It's a complicated problem to solve. I'm sure that that's something that they've considered and they'll be working on. But I would think if their desire was to sell some of these new tanks, they would have ways of making them a little bit more effective than units like Death Company and Sanguinary Guard, which have probably already returned on the investment to produce them. So that's kind of my take on that. My speculation on the new book. Now let's talk a little bit about list archetypes. So again, this is all sort of in the interim, so take all this with a grain of salt and take my salt with a grain of salt. But with the way that armies are made now, it doesn't really reward people for taking multiple detachments. And if you want to get the most out of Blood Angel characters, you need to take multiple detachments, or you need to take a brigade. Now, we don't have the points efficiency required to make a brigade work. Our units cost too much. By the time we fill all the requisites, we may not even have enough points to put any upgrades on anybody or have anything more than the minimum squad size, which is pretty common in Marines anyway. But I think you're going to have to choose between whether you focus more on Death Company armies or Sanguinary Guard based armies. Now, some of the other choices you could have may involve workarounds with Vanguard veterans and Redemptor dreadnoughts and things like that. But if you're wanting to play into the Blood Angel strengths and use their unique units, you're probably going to have to choose between Sanguinary Guard or Death Company. I see a Sanguinary Guard archetype list that focuses a lot on Dante, on the Sanguinor, and either Corbilos and another Sanguinary Priest in a battalion. I see the elite choices being Sanguinary Guard, Sanguinary Ancient, and Terminators. I think Terminators will synergize really well with Dante with re-rolling to hit with their Thunderhammers. I think that the Storm Shields are a really big bonus. The fact that they've got 3 wounds now. I think that the Sanguinary Priests will be able to help them maximize as well. They might fill that role that the Death Company had before, where they'd rush up with a unit of 12 or unit of 15 with a few Thunderhammers in. Now you've got a unit that's coming in, or that has some kind of tougher, smaller profile that still hits hard with those Thunderhammers, using the Blood Chalice to move you into the Assault Doctrine, so you've got AP -3 on those hammers, and I think that those things are going to synergize really well. On the flip side, I see a lot of Asterath and Lamardi's combo lists with the litanies on Death Company. Asterath handing out free leadership buffs to a bunch of Death Company units that are separate, the mobility of Jump Pack Death Company, and I still think that you're going to see them supported by a Sanguinary Priest in some capacity. I can see Corbilos walking around with some Death Company intercessors, handing out his buffs and doing things like that, but I think Jump Pack Death Company are going to be kind of the big winners. Now, the real choice we're going to have to be is if we're taking one of those elements out of our existing army list that featured both of those units, we instead have to think, well, what are we going to fill those points with? And that's where I think the Wild West is, and I think that's where the fun exploration is. Maybe we'll have some opportunities to fill in some things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts or some of the other things that we had no access to from the Space Marine book, because now Blood Angels can access a lot of those things. Alternatively, maybe we're just taking smaller units of the other ones and just kind of hoping that they draw some attention or pull things out. Some MSU with Sanguinary Guard might work, but the elite slot is really choked up right now, and they added scouts to it too, which is just mind-boggling. I don't understand how scouts are an elite choice now. I never really understood why they were an elite choice for Space Wolves, aside from just a thematic reason, but this is all just kind of temporary, and we're all speculating, and I don't think there's going to be enough time really for a interim Blood Angel meta to show up, so we're just going to have to kind of wait and see how this all pans out. But what do you guys think? Do you think that Blood Angels are in a good place or a bad place? Do you think that the Space Marine Codex stratagems are enough? Do you think that losing the mobility of Wings of Fire and Descent of Angels is going to really hurt us? Or do you feel like we're still okay? Let me know. You can put it in a comment. You can send me a message. I'm happy to listen to all of it. And thank you, by the way, for listening and putting up with just the absolute destruction that is my voice box right now. I recorded quite a bit for another video, and the audio on that just got completely jacked up, and so I had to redo all of this and my voice is a little shot. My falsetto is a little bit more out of control than normal, so thank you for bearing with me. I suppose you could make that a drinking game if you wanted. How many times do you hear my falsetto? Take a shot. Well, with that out of the way, once again, just invite you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, wherever you see this, and I hope to hear from you and talk to you again soon about updates that come to the Blood Angels in the future. Cheers.